He built the team. He made the calls. He signed the players. And even he didn't see this coming. Andrew Friedman has been called many things in his career. A visionary. An architect. The man who took a Dodgers franchise that was already winning and made it into something that opponents don't just try to beat, they try to survive. He has a reputation in baseball front offices that occupies a category most executives spend entire careers trying to reach and never do. The genius of team building. That is not a title the sport hands out casually. Baseball is a profession populated by brilliant, competitive, obsessive minds, people who have devoted their entire adult lives to understanding the game at a level most fans will never access. To be called the genius among them is to be separated from a field that is already separated from everyone else. Andrew Friedman earned that title the hard way. Decision by decision. Year by year. Trade deadline by trade deadline. And then, in the most audacious single off-season in the history of the sport, he did what everyone said was impossible and signed Shohei Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto in the same winter. Back to back. 2 generational talents. 1 franchise. He built the machine. And then the machine did something that even he, the genius, the architect, the man who drew up the blueprints, could not fully predict. He finally admitted it. The press conference had not been scheduled for revelations. These things rarely are. Organizational press conferences in baseball exist in a specific register, informational, careful, managed. Executives sit behind microphones and answer questions with the practiced neutrality of people who understand that every word they say is being recorded and will be used in future negotiations, future narratives, future assessments of whether they were right or wrong about the things they claim to believe. Andrew Friedman is better at that register than almost anyone in the sport. He has been doing this long enough, and at a high enough level, to have developed a fluency in saying substantive things without saying things that come back to damage him. It is a skill. A refined, deliberate, hard-won skill. Which is exactly why what he said stopped everyone in the room. A reporter had asked him, the question phrased in the way reporters phrase questions when they are trying to get an executive to confirm what everyone already suspects, whether Ohtani's performance this season had met the expectations the organization had when it signed him. Friedman didn't reach for the careful answer. He didn't construct the diplomatic response that acknowledges the question without fully engaging with it. He looked at the reporter and he told the truth. Shohei's value exceeded all my predictions. 12 words. From the man who predicted everything. That is what made the room go still. Not the sentiment. Everyone watching Ohtani this season had arrived at some version of that conclusion through their own observation. The performance had been extraordinary in the quantifiable ways and in the ways that resist quantification. The numbers told part of the story. The rest of the story was told by the expression on opposing managers' faces when they had to fill out a lineup card and account for a man who existed in 2 places on it simultaneously. But the sentiment coming from Friedman was different in kind from the sentiment coming from a fan or a broadcaster or even a rival executive commenting from a distance. Because Friedman is the man who made the decision. Who ran the projections. Who sat in rooms with the best analysts in the sport and built models and stress-tested assumptions and arrived at a number, a contract, a commitment, a bet, that represented his most rigorous assessment of what Shohei Ohtani was worth. He had done all of that. And then Ohtani had exceeded it. The genius of team building had looked at the greatest player alive and still underestimated him. To understand the weight of that admission, you have to understand how Andrew Friedman thinks about value. He is not a man who operates on intuition. He is not a man who signs players because they feel special or because the fan base demands it or because the moment calls for a bold gesture. Every major decision he has made in his career has been built on a foundation of rigorous analysis. Of systematic thinking. Of the kind of disciplined evaluation that separates the very best front office minds from the ones who make expensive mistakes by falling in love with the story a player tells rather than the data a player generates. When he decided to pursue Shohei Ohtani, he did not do it because Ohtani was the most exciting player in baseball. He did it because his analysis told him that the value Ohtani could provide, across all the dimensions of front office measures, on the field and off it, in the standings and in the culture of the organization and in the commercial reality of running a major market franchise, was greater than any other single acquisition he could make. He ran those numbers. He stress-tested those assumptions. He pressure-checked every projection with the same rigor he applies to everything. And Ohtani still came out the other side of all of it larger than the model could contain. The Yamamoto signing had been the other half of the vision. That winter, the winter that baseball people will be talking about for the next 20 years, Friedman had not stopped at Ohtani. He had kept going. He had identified Yoshinobu Yamamoto as the complementary piece to what Ohtani represented, had understood that building a rotation around a generational arm while simultaneously placing a two-way generational talent in the middle of his lineup was not just addition but multiplication, and had gone and gotten him. Back to back. In the same winter. When it was over, the reaction from the rest of baseball had been 1 part admiration and 2 parts something that looked, if you watched closely enough, a lot like despair. Because the Dodgers had not just signed 2 great players. They had demonstrated, once again, that they were operating in a different category of strategic thinking from everyone else. That Friedman's ability to identify value, to execute transactions, to build a coherent long-term vision and then actually execute it in the chaotic, competitive, zero-sum environment of Major League free agency was not replicable. Other teams had tried. Other teams had resources. Other teams had smart people and good analysts and genuine ambitions to compete at the highest level. And Friedman had still gotten there first. Had still gotten both of them. The genius of team building. But here is the thing about genius. Here is the thing that even the most analytically sophisticated mind in the sport had to sit with as this season unfolded. Genius, in the context of baseball evaluation, means being more right than everyone else. It does not mean being fully right. It does not mean arriving at a complete and accurate picture of what a player will become. It means building the best available model from the best available information and arriving at a conclusion that proves out over time. Andrew Friedman's model for Shohei Ohtani had been, by any reasonable standard, extremely good. The projections had been aggressive. The commitment had been enormous, the largest in the history of professional sports. Nobody who looked at the numbers would have said the Dodgers had been naive or reckless or captured by emotion. And still, the reality of Ohtani on a daily basis had exceeded the projection. Not in 1 or 2 areas. Not in ways that could be explained by a favorable schedule or a hot streak or the normal variance that causes players to occasionally outperform their models over a stretch. In ways that were systematic and sustained and that spoke to something in Ohtani that the models, even the best ones, had not fully captured. Friedman had seen it happening all season. Had watched the data accumulate. Had sat with the growing gap between what he had projected and what was actually occurring and processed it with the same analytical rigor he brings to everything. And then he had said it out loud. Shohei's value exceeded all my predictions. A reporter followed up. The follow-up question was the obvious one, the question everyone in the room wanted answered but wasn't sure they would get. What surprised you most? Friedman leaned back slightly. Not the retreat of someone buying time. The movement of someone deciding how honest to be. The room was quiet enough that the sound of someone shifting in a chair near the back was audible. He said, I knew the production would be exceptional. We built models around that. We had very high confidence in the production. He paused. What I didn't fully capture, what I don't think anyone fully captures until they see it every day, is the effect he has on everything around him. On the other players. On the opponent. On the decisions a manager on the other side has to make before the game even starts. That part doesn't fit neatly into a model. And that part is bigger than I expected. The other players had spoken about it in fragments throughout the season. Not in the organized, quotable way of a press conference but in the offhand moments, the dugout observations and the post-game comments and the things that come out when athletes are relaxed enough to say what they actually think rather than what the situation asks for. Freddie Freeman had said, early in the season, that sharing a lineup with Ohtani changed the at-bats he himself received in ways that were almost unfair to the opposing pitchers. That the decisions made earlier in the lineup, the walks issued to Ohtani, the pitches not thrown to him, the entire strategic calculus that swirled around his spot in the order, created conditions downstream that Freeman had never experienced at this level in his career. Mookie Betts had been more direct. He had looked at a reporter and said, simply, "You understand the game differently when you play next to him." These were not things that lived easily in a projection model. They were real effects, measurable in aggregate, visible in the numbers if you knew how to look, but resistant to the kind of clean quantification that models prefer. They were the things that lived in the spaces between the statistics. And they were the things, Friedman had now admitted, that he had not fully predicted. Yoshinobu Yamamoto had been watching all of this from inside it. The other signing. The other piece of the vision. The young pitcher who had come from Japan carrying his own extraordinary reputation and had been placed inside an organization built around the player who was redefining what the sport thought possible. Those who had observed Yamamoto closely through the season described something interesting. A player who had arrived with the quiet confidence of genuine ability and who had, over the months, developed something additional. Something that the people around Ohtani tended to develop when they spent enough time watching him work. A recalibration of what was possible. Because that is what Ohtani does to the people closest to him. He does not just perform at a level that exceeds expectation. He performs at a level that restructures the expectation itself. That makes people who watch him every day begin to revise upward their sense of what athletic achievement can look like. Even the people who had set the original expectations. Even the genius who had built the model. Even Andrew Friedman. He was asked, near the end of the press conference, whether he would do it differently. Knowing what he knew now. Whether the contract, the commitment, the numbers, whether any of it would change if he had the information he had now rather than the information he had then. Friedman looked at the reporter for a moment. He almost smiled. Almost. "The only thing I'd change," he said, "is I'd have found a way to sign him sooner." The genius of team building built the machine. And then the machine exceeded the genius. Andrew Friedman finally said it out loud. And somewhere in a Dodgers clubhouse, Shohei Ohtani is already making the next model obsolete.